Hello, feral friends and fellow nature nerds, and thank you for tuning in to this Dirt Dispatch, which is number 58. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara. So, I was recently gifted a book, a booklet, a publication. Anyways, it's titled Michigan Wildlife Sketches: The Native Mammals of Michigan's Forest, Fields, and Marshes. It was published by the Michigan Department of Natural Resources in September of 1972. And in addition to literal sketches of various animals, it includes descriptions and information about these animals. But here's the thing: what makes this a very entertaining thing to read is that the descriptions are both wildly subjective and in some cases also kind of inaccurate. Now, you could argue that some of these inaccuracies are simply a result of what we knew about those animals at the time. That in the 50 plus years since the publication of this book, we've increased our knowledge, but in some cases, I wonder if that's really true. So, for this Dirt Dispatch, what I want to do is read some passages from the first chapter of this book, The Possum, Invader from the South, and offer some of my own thoughts as we go along. So let's hear what the Michigan Department of Natural Resources had to say about opossums in 1972. It starts like this. The opossum is a comparative newcomer to Michigan, having been absent or very rare in pioneer times. There are some records of the opossum in Michigan in the early 1800s, but they seem to have disappeared completely about 1860 and reappeared about the time of World War I. Since about 1927, they have become widely distributed in the lower peninsula. Although the possum is considered an important game animal in the southern states, particularly in that part of the South called Dixie, it has never gained much popularity in Michigan. This is probably due partly to its appearance of ungainly stupidity and partly to its unsavory reputation as a robber of chicken roosts and nests. The shambling gait, rat like tail, snarling, toothy quote unquote grin, beady eyes, and unkempt coat all detract from its quote unquote personality and create an unfavorable comparison with its woodland neighbor, the handsome, intelligent, and cute coon. So let's analyze this a little bit. Now, it's true that opossums came to North America during the Great American Interchange, which was about 2.7 million years ago, but titling this Invader from the South makes it sound like it was much more recent. Now, armadillos also came to North America during that time, but they've made considerably slower progress because they're less tolerant of the cold. So this publication claims that there were records from the early 1800s, and another source I looked up suggested that, quote, the first opossums in Michigan were likely brought to the state by European settlers in the 1800s. These settlers may have been interested in the opossum's fur as a trade item. Over time, some escaped or were intentionally released, and their population began to grow. But that same source didn't list a source for this claim, and also listed the first recorded sighting as 1886. So there's some discrepancy there, since 1886 is well after their claim that settlers brought them in the early 1800s, and 26 years after the Michigan Department of Natural Resources claim of their disappearance. My guess would be that they were present in the state prior to the early 1800s, whether through natural migration or accidental introduction. I can't say, but Michigan became a state in 1837, and it's entirely possible that they were either rarely seen because they're primarily nocturnal, and or we just don't have any surviving written records about them. We know that opossums were present in Virginia in the early 1600s, so is it really that much of a stretch to say they couldn't have been in Michigan much earlier than the 1800s? The opening paragraph's conclusion and disparagement of the possum prompted my daughter to say, why does he hate possums so much? And like I said, it's wildly subjective for an official publication. The next section is titled A Sort of Living Fossil, and it reads like this. Perhaps no modern description of Brer Possum has been better than that of Captain John Smith, who reported that the possum hath a head like a swine, a tail like a rat, as big as a cat, and hath under her belly a bag wherein she carried her young. The author then continues, actually, we should look on the poor, stupid old possum with considerable respect, for he is a sort of living fossil, a veritable Methuselah among mammals, and most of his relatives have been true fossils these past million years or more. Moreover, the possum today is not just a highly modified modern descendant of the fossil possums of a million years ago, he still looks just about like his remote ancestors. So little change has taken place through the ages that a possum skull from the ancient rock formation of Wyoming can scarcely be distinguished from that of a possum from a hollow tree today. Why has the possum remained like his fossil ancestors for millenniums while other animals have become highly modified and, quote, modernized to meet changing conditions of climate and geography? Slow, stupid, weak, with no special equipment for competition, why does he still exist and even extend his range? The answer is really rather simple. He eats anything and everything, animal or vegetable, dead or alive, and produces lots and lots of offspring. Now, some of that is not too far off base. A diverse diet certainly helps with survival, and yes, they do have a relatively high reproductive rate. The average litter size is 6 to 9, but maxes out at 13, and depending on where they live, they can have 2 to 3 litters per year. But a high reproductive rate usually means that only a few survive to adulthood, and possums also have a very short lifespan, rarely more than 3 years under the best of circumstances, and generally only 1 to 2. Now, after this, the author goes on to talk about possums being marsupials. I'm not going to read that whole section, but there were some parts that stood out. For example, the author states that, quote, every native mammal of Australia is a marsupial, unquote. Now, while marsupials do make up a high percentage of Australia's native mammals, they're not all marsupials. Australia also has monotremes, the egg-laying mammals, and placental mammals like rodents, bats, and marine mammals. Surely this was known in 1972, but I don't know, maybe not. The author also says, quote, possums are very good hangers on, since their tails are prehensile and can be used from swinging from a branch or in carrying objects such as leaves or sticks, unquote. Now, an opossum's tail is used as an aid in climbing and also to carry leaves or grass back to their dens, but they certainly can't swing from a branch, especially adults. That tail is not strong enough to support their body weight for more than a very short period of time. Now, the next section is where he gets real personal. It's titled, quote, he has little intelligence. And the first paragraph discusses playing dead. One of the peculiar characteristics of the possum, which has given rise to endless speculation, is his habit of playing possum. Frequently, when a possum is attacked or thinks he is about to be attacked, he will suddenly fall limp and inert and draw back the gums from his long rows of glittering white teeth until he looks as if he might have been dead a month. One can roll him about with a foot, pick him up and carry him away by the tail, or offer him any indignity, and he will not make a move. Were it not for his warmth and pulse, one might really believe he was dead. But put him down and walk quietly away a few steps, then watch him closely. His little shoe-button eyes will open, and if he doesn't see anything dangerous looking, he will get up and go about his business. Now, as we've learned since then, this is not exactly how this behavior works. Playing possum is an involuntary reaction, not under conscious control, exactly like fainting goats. While some animals that display this same type of behavior, known more formally as tonic immobility or thanatosis, remain conscious and will scan the environment to see if the threat is gone, opossums are not one of them. The second paragraph in this section discusses the possum's intelligence. The author says, as to intelligence, most observers agree that the possum has little. Ernest Thompson Seton tried an experiment to determine the relative brain capacity of various mammals. He used beans to fill the brain case of mammal skulls with the following results. It took 21 beans to fill a possum brain case, 35 for a skunk, 46 for a hare, 70 for a porcupine, 150 for a raccoon, 198 for a fox, 325 for a coyote, and 438 for a wolf. Of course, the larger size of the fox, coyote, and wolf introduced another factor in the problem. However, the skunk, hare, and porcupine are not exactly mental giants and are about the size of a possum, yet their brains are much larger. The coon, not much larger but recognized as a smart trickster, had over 7 times the brain capacity of the possum. Seaton concludes that this brain test corroborates observations in the woods and characterizes the opossum as a silly, grinning idiot. Now, come on, really? That just seems mean. The bean test? Seriously? At least they acknowledge that the fox, coyote, and wolf are larger animals and have larger brain cases, but still, and I'm not saying opossums are super smart, but I see some flaws in the bean test of intelligence. Like, for instance, brain size is not a reliable indicator of intelligence. Look at the corvids like crows and blue jays. They're some of the smartest animals on the planet, but I bet their brain cases only hold a few beans. To suggest that the possum has survived millions of years in spite of being quote unquote stupid just because it has a variable diet and high reproductive rate just seems wrong. Now, the author again accuses the possum of being stupid in the next section. Was once public enemy is the title. From time to time, the opossum receives unfavorable publicity because of its alleged depredation on game animals. For a time, the possum was rated as pretty nearly public enemy number one by certain groups of sportsmen. Now, however, the red fox has usurped this unenviable distinction, and the possum has become a minor consideration. As previously stated, possums can and do eat everything, and an extensive examination of possum scats or possum stomachs will reveal every sort of material, from horse meat to earthworms, and from oak leaves to grass roots. No one accuses the possum of killing the horses or cutting down the oak trees, and probably most of the flesh is obtained from carcasses. Possums do catch chickens when they get into the roost at night, and do rob birds' nests when they discover them, and will eat any young animal which they can catch. But they are too slow, clumsy, and stupid to make much of a living from active prey. Fears that possums would drive coons out of hollow trees and woodchucks from burrows have been pretty well disproved by investigations carried out at the Swan Creek Wildlife Experiment Station of the Michigan Department of Conservation. Fears that possums would multiply until they would become a menacing host have likewise proved groundless in Michigan. The possum simply cannot take it during a severe Michigan winter. He never learned to hibernate like the bear, coon, or woodchuck, and is obliged to get out and hustle for food if a storm lasts more than a day or two. When he gets out in near zero weather, he freezes his ears and tail and often perishes from exposure. The possum population in Michigan always drops to a low point following a, quote, good old-fashioned Michigan winter, unquote. Now, I'm not sure what game animals they were accusing the possum of preying on, and I didn't realize there was such an abundance of dead horses laying around for them to scavenge on in the middle 1900s. As for the Michigan winter controlling their population, there is a lot of truth in that. They are vulnerable to frostbite on their ears and tail, but also have limited fur insulation, low fat reserves, and a high metabolic rate. So, a harsh winter would definitely take a toll on the population. The author concludes with this. The possum is of little economic importance here in Michigan. Although possum is eagerly eaten in the South, it has never become popular in the North, and few trappers will skin a possum for the price of the pelt. To date, we can only say that the possum does not appear to be a serious threat to any of our wildlife species, but neither does he seem to be a particularly desirable addition to our native fauna. Anyway, he is here, and there doesn't seem to be anything we can do about it, so we may as well view him philosophically as an interesting example of a living fossil, going about his affairs calmly unaware of the fact that he was born 1,000,000 years too late. Now, I love possums, so I think they're an incredibly desirable addition to the native fauna. And I have to agree with my daughter. This guy really seems to have a beef with opossums. But to be fair, looking at other chapters in the book, they include the black bear, buffoon of the North Woods, the raccoon, masked clown of the woodlots, and the porcupine, fool of the woodlands. So It seems the possum is in good company. And on that note, we'll end this episode of Dirt Dispatches. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to support the podcast, here's how you can do that. Become a patron. Subscriptions start at just $5 a month, and with 3 paid months, you get some very cool Dispatches from the Forest merch. You can find all the details at patreon.com/dispatches from the forest. You can donate using either PayPal or Venmo in my email address, dispatchesfromtheforest@gmail.com. You can also use that address to email me if you have a question, a comment, or a request for a future episode. You can donate using the Cash App and the hashtag ForestNerd. If you prefer to send a check, just send me a message and I'll happily provide my mailing address. Check out the merch store at cafepress.com/shop/dispatches from the forest. Click on products and find something you like. Finally, follow Dispatches from the Forest on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. I'm your host, Tim the Nature Nerd O'Hara, reminding you to go outside and get dirty. Dispatches from the Forest recognizes that the lands where we live, work, and recreate are the traditional homelands of the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho people. We understand that this land holds immense significance for the original stewards, native nations, and peoples of this region. Dirt Dispatches is a production of Dispatches from the Forest and may not be used or rebroadcast whole or in part without express written permission.